This is episode 43 of Cinescope, and you will always remember this as the day that you almost caught Captain Jack Sparrow. Welcome to Cinescope, where our goal is not to criticize or to assign ratings, but rather to celebrate the movies we love, exploring story, characters, music, and relevance to the world around us. I'm your host, Chad Hopkins, and joining me today is Sarah Parrish to talk about one of our favorite films, Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. Sarah, how are you doing tonight?
I am so good. I'm probably a little too stoked to talk to you about this movie.
There's nothing wrong with that. I appreciate enthusiasm. That's always a plus on a show like this.
I love it so much. To be honest, I just got off the phone with one of my best friends. She and I just figured out a couple weeks ago, we went to Disney World together and we were in line for the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. And she told me, she was like, I don't know why, but I'm like a little embarrassed to say that like this movie's the reason I got into casting. She like works in casting.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, dude, this is one of my favorite movies in the world. Are you kidding me? And we're like best friends. It was crazy.
That's awesome. So you're a Caribbean person rather than a Caribbean.
I
think I switch back and forth, to be honest. I'm no way consistent.
No, I know. It goes back and forth. It depends on like who, like the announcer voice guy, whoever's doing that. It's like it switches off. Some people just say it with Caribbean. I really don't know what's the correct version, but I remember I was raised before the movies learning like geography and saying Caribbean. So I just tend to say Caribbean.
It works for me.
Yeah, whatever.
Well, you and I have known each other for a few years at this point, I think. This is our first time talking, more or less face to face.
I know, it's weird. It's funny because Lacey introduced us, our mutual theater friend. So I knew that you were into, I don't know, I guess the arts.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we just kind of follow each other on Twitter and on Facebook and all that stuff. But yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you, dude. It's weird. Or like internet friends.
Yeah, internet friends are the best.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to tell the people out there listening anything about yourself, what you do, any of that kind of stuff before we get started?
Sure. Yeah, so I grew up in theater, as we kind of said, and I had used to want to be an actress. It was like a childhood dream. And it started with movies like this, Disney movies. And then when I went to high school, I did theater, and then college, I just didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and I knew that wasn't really realistic. But I ended up going to film school, which I guess is more realistic. Not really. And I had a lot of fun, and I made a lot of great contacts, and I do think that is something I am going to do with my future. And I sort of became a writer. And through friends of friends who I made in college, somehow I landed a software job, which is what I'm doing right now. I knew a little bit of coding, so I'm working in software right now, and I'm just writing on the side, and I love movies.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Writing, creative writing is a talent I wish I had, so I'm kind of jealous that you have that skill set.
Oh, I genuinely believe that anybody who is creative and who loves ideas, like you could do it, but it does take work. Even every single day, I have to force myself to write. Honestly, you're never going to feel like writing. It's hard. It's a hard job.
Yeah, it's a muscle you sort of have to flex to improve.
Yeah, and along the way, like you're never really gonna love what you're writing until the last I don't know, maybe draft number 20. It's ridiculous. It's a miserable dream. But it's a lot of fun, it's a learning process like any other kind of hobby and, passion.
Right. As long as it's something you enjoy, I think that's what matters in the end, right?
Yeah. I mean, storytelling is just so fun, and it's something that we as a species honestly have done since the beginning of us. At first there was oral tradition, and then it went on to writing and to other formats, and now we have movies, which is fantastic, and it's something that I still want to get into. So,
well, hit me up whenever you do, and I'm sure we can find like music or
dude.
or something.
Yes,
And I can look at the credits and say, hey, I know that person.
Yeah.
And she was on my podcast.
I noticed at least via Twitter, we tend to agree on most things.
Yeah, that's for sure. We
Yeah,
do.
for sure.
Well, cool. I guess that sort of brings us to our discussion. Are you ready?
Oh, I'm so ready. I've honestly been like rewatching some stuff from this movie because it's my favorite movie, really. It's what got me into like creative writing, genuinely.
Uh-huh.
So excited to talk about it with you.
That's awesome. And that's what the show's all about, is talking about the movies we love and why. So
Yeah.
let's dive in to Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. So the movie was released on July 29th of 2003 and was directed by Gore Verbinski, who also directed Mouse Hunt, The Mexican, The Ring, The Weatherman, the other two Pirates of the Caribbean movies in this trilogy, Dead Man's Chest and At World's End, as well as Rango, The Lone Ranger, and A Cure for Wellness. The movie was written by Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, and it was based on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride by Walt Disney at Disneyland. The music was composed by Klaus Badelt, who also composed scores for Equilibrium, K-19, The Widowmaker, The Time Machine, Basic, Catwoman, The Promise, Constantine, Poseidon, Rescue Dawn, and the animated TMNT movie. And this movie does star Johnny Depp, Orlando Bloom, Keira Knightley, Jeffrey Rush, Jack Davenport, Kevin McNally, Jonathan Pryce, Zoe Saldana, Lee Ehrenberg, and Mackenzie Crook. So you've already given us a little bit of background. Do you remember anything about your first experience seeing this movie?
Oh, yeah. Actually, when I first saw it, it kind of scared me a little. I can't really remember how old I was. I must have been like, when did it come out? 2003? So I remember I was too young to see it. This was Disney's first PG-13 movie, and my parents kind of let me see it anyways. And I went with my older brother and also my dad. And my brother had already seen the movie, and so he kind of knew which parts, or he was like, hey, duck behind the seats, you don't want to see this part. And so I kind of like dipped my head, and it was of course when the pirates would come out and they were in like their zombie kind of form. But yeah, I remember though just thinking Elizabeth was like the most beautiful, cool, like awesome character, and then Jack was just hilarious. Even as a kid, I thought he was so funny. And yeah, I mean, that was my first experience, was in the theater. And then I watched it again and again when it came on demand, because that was sort of starting to become a thing back then. It wasn't like fully a thing, but when we all got cable, we could order movies on demand. And I remember that was like one of the first movies that we were really like watching because I loved it so much. So.
Yeah, a lot of these movies that I watched when I was a kid, I don't remember my first experience with it. But this one I actually do remember the first time I watched it. We were on a family vacation in Destin, Florida, I believe. And we were on this little rented condo on the beach or something like that, and it was storming. And so we decided we were going to watch a movie as a family, the 10 of us, in our condo that night.
Oh my God.
And I guess Pirates was a popular choice, and so we went out and bought it on DVD. I didn't see it in theaters. We bought it on DVD, and we all sat in the little living room or living area of this condo, and we watched Pirates of the Caribbean together for the first time. And I don't remember a lot of specifics of the actual viewing experience. I just remember the when and the where. But I do remember laughing a lot, I think, mostly because of Jack. And overall, I remember liking it. That's the only like first experience and memories that I have of watching this movie.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to think back to these movies that you first saw when you were really young, because it is, your memories get worse and worse as you go on. And I just like recalculated it in my head. 2003, I would have been in third grade, so I was like 8 years old. And yeah, I mean that's pretty young to remember like how we felt. But I remember rewatching it as I got older over and over again, and it just felt like it got better and better. The more I understood story and character, and I was old enough to not be as scared, it got like better for me.
Yeah, I was never one of the people who didn't care for the sequels. A lot of people don't like the second and third because they're so convoluted. And then especially on Stranger Tides, people don't love them. I like all of them, at least in their own ways. But I don't think it's hard to argue that this one is definitely the best of the bunch.
Yeah.
And I saw the second and third one in theaters later. And it was all because the first experience with this one was so good. I enjoyed it so much.
I think I saw all of them in theaters from then on as well. The first one, I just got lucky. I was just a kid. I didn't choose to go. But the other ones, yeah, I definitely was down to see it when they opened. I'm the same. I really liked all the sequels. I mean, On Stranger Tides, I guess I have a few qualms, but overall, they're pretty good. Like they're made really well, and the writers dedicated a lot of time to making sure that it doesn't drag. It keeps you going, and they keep adding new things.
Right. I especially love the complexity of the plot line from the second to the third. I just think that's a really cool through line. And so it's always fun to revisit those. In fact, I'll probably be rewatching those over this weekend before I go see the fourth one, or the fifth one.
Yeah, because the new one came out. I still haven't seen it yet. So my best friend, the one I told you about, or one of my best friends, she just saw the fifth one tonight, and she texted me and she was like, "Hey, listen, I know you're doing that podcast, and I don't want to text you any spoilers, but holy shit, you gotta go see it."
That's awesome.
Like, oh my God. Yeah, so I'm stoked. We should definitely see it. Where are you again? Also, where do
Dallas.
you live? You're in Dallas.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So we can't see it together, but that's okay. We could still text.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, what exactly in this story draws you in? What do you like about the happenings, going ons in this movie?
Well, it's all like just personal preference. I'm super into fantasy. I'm mostly into high fantasy. Like I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan and stuff like that. But I also, for some reason, pirates draws me in. I don't know what it is. Like it's the adventure and like the kind of rebelliousness and all that stuff. It's just a really good combination. And it started with Jay Wolpert. He was the one who like adapted the ride from Disneyland, right? Like at first it was just a ride, and he made that script. And then later, Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, they were the ones who added the supernatural element, and that's what made it sort of magical. And just like who would have thought that like that combination would be so perfect? Like I just think it's just such a good blend of fantasy and kind of history in a way, like these pirates and mutiny, and at the same time you have like Commodore Norrington and like the royalty aspect of it. I just think it's a good combination of these elements. And then on top of that, just the story is structurally brilliant. Like they just did it really well. And it started with the writing. The writing is just on point. And that's why it's so funny. I think they were writing it was either Hugh Jackman or Matthew McConaughey, but when they auditioned Johnny Depp, he read it and he was like, this is like super quirky. Like, I don't know. I think this is kind of goofy. And then, he did that whole like Keith Richards thing. That was like his inspiration, right? For like the character. And he was like, I want to make this guy kind of like cocky and almost drunk. And then just that element that he brought to it kind of juxtaposed the whole proper Britishness that was going on with the rest of the movie. And it like just brings it down to an almost meta level for me. I don't know. That's why it's so funny at parts, is because, like, okay, you remember that part where, like, they're about to go after Elizabeth, and he turns to Will, and he's like, what would you do for this woman? Like, how far are you prepared to go? And he's like, I would die for her. And he's like, oh, good.
Right.
Just that realness that meets the proper sort of attitude. It's just perfect. I don't know. It's just a really great script.
I completely agree. What's funny is that there was this weird sort of expectation for a movie like this. There was a stigma with these theme park attraction movies. A year previous to this one, I think there was the Country Bears movie that completely tanked, and they had done the Twilight Zone, which I actually kind of like that one. But there was a stigma to these movie theme park attraction movies. What story can you tell with Pirates of the Caribbean? So it was predicted to not make any money, and then this explodes. It's just so much better than you'd expect it to be. I think people feared that it would be too silly at the get-go just because of the antics in the ride. But from the very first shot of the film, where you have the ship coming out of the fog, and you have little Elizabeth Swann singing "Yo ho, yo ho, pirate's life for me," and there's fog everywhere, and then all of a sudden Will is in the water, and then there's this burning, destroyed ship. And then not long after, Elizabeth sees the Black Pearl. And it's just all this real creepy, dark tone at the very start of the film. There's no comedy there at all. And so the whole film, I think they do a fantastic job of balancing the scary and the off-putting nature of a lot of it with the goofier elements of Jack Sparrow. He really is the foil for the more serious aspects of the film. And that balance is towed so wonderfully in this movie that you can be scared at one point and in the next scene you're laughing just because Johnny Depp's being ridiculous in a great way. And I love that it sort of defeated the expectations set upon it and the expected failures by just being something at the same time completely serious, but also completely fun.
It's like it takes itself just seriously enough, and it knows when to step back, and it knows when to have that comedic relief, and it just, the whole thing just feels appropriate. Yeah. I'm so glad also that this movie got a good budget, because like just the scenes and the costumes, and like they fully dedicated themselves to this world, and it could have been totally goofy, but they just, I don't know, they knew what to do. But I mean, like, Terry and Ted, they were the guys that did like El Dorado and Shrek, and I think they did Aladdin. They did a bunch of like movies before for DreamWorks and Disney, and they're just great writers. And I think that the writing had a lot to do with it. And then, Verbinski's a great visual storyteller. He's proved himself, obviously. And it was just a really good combination of cast, crew, everything just fell into place.
Yeah, it's kind of good that it was competing against Lord of the Rings at the time. This came right before Return of the King came out.
Yeah.
And so Verbinski was like, yeah, we need a budget this big because look at what our competition is. And it really worked out for the better. And there's like great location shooting, these giant ship battles, these sword fights. All of it is just so cool and a treat to look at. I think this is some of the best sword fighting outside of the Inigo Montoya and Wesley fight in Princess Bride, right?
Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you referenced that. No, but seriously, they dedicated a lot of time. They were like, we're going to train these actors, and I think they used stunt doubles, of course, a few times, but for the most part, they were really spending a lot of time on just making this look as real and as good as possible. And once again, this was their first PG-13 movie for Disney, I think, and they were just fully dedicated to making it as real as possible while still being playful. Yeah, and I think, the fight scenes had a lot to do with that, and like just the explosions, and they needed that budget and that competition. It pushed it to a supreme level that I'm so glad it reached. Oh, I love this movie.
And rewatching it today, I was actually pretty impressed with how well the special effects held up, because it's 14 years old at this point, and I wouldn't say they're up to the same standards as they are today, but it works for this film, and it is as real and holds up as well as it needs to for this film to just be as visually stunning as it is. The zombie pirates, as I call them, they're genuinely scary. The first time they're revealed properly, when Elizabeth is on the Black Pearl with Barbossa and she steps out and they're washing the deck, and they're doing completely normal things, but just it's the first time we've seen them, and they're terrifying.
Yeah, that's actually my favorite scene of the entire movie.
Oh, really?
And yeah, I mean, just for multiple reasons, like because of that especially. But okay, that scene, I know Elizabeth was established as a strong character in the beginning, and a lot of times I think extroverts can come off as mean, and that's not always the case. You know what I mean? Like, I think a lot of writers write introverts because writers tend to be introverts, and those characters are kind and they're kind of shy. Elizabeth is like a strong woman. Like she's just like, I'm the governor's daughter. She has all this wealth and privilege, but she's not in love with Commodore Norrington, and she knows it. And that scene where she's on the pirate ship for the first time, well, really when they come into her bedroom and they're like attacking her and she says, I want to talk to your captain. To me, that all the way until the pirate fight is like one of my all-time favorite scenes. She is just like established as this character who's not going to take shit and who is just down for adventure. It's just like so good. Like she's just like brought onto the ship, and they're like, okay, we're gonna introduce you to the captain. Sure, why not? And she has that necklace, and she knows it means something to him. And when she like holds it over the edge, and she just tests them right in front of their faces, right in front of all these dudes with swords in their hands, and then she like almost drops it into the water, but she catches it, and she's like, oh, this does mean something to you, doesn't it? I think that is such a great establishment of character. Like, I could go on and on.
And they set that up in the prologue, where she's fascinated with pirates at an early age. She's these mysterious people who are so stigmatized by society. She's standing on the bow of the ship singing yo ho yo ho. She says straight up that she'd love to meet a pirate. I think they're fascinating. And she steals the medallion off of Will, and we learn later that she's apparently been reading up on them and knows the pirate code and all this kind of stuff. It's set up from the very beginning. And this interest sort of proves useful on more than one occasion throughout the film, where she brings that knowledge to the forefront and takes control of situations, like the scene you were talking about with her almost dropping the medallion, and other scenes where everybody else on the Pearl has given up. All of Jack's crew has given up, and she takes control and says, no, let's do this. Let's load the cannons. Let's prepare to fight back. And it's because she has grown up yearning for this sort of adventure, whereas Will has sort of tried to step aside from the pirate life. He and everybody else think that pirates are these big evil people, and all they do is rape and pillage and kill. And Elizabeth sees past it just a little bit. She sees the adventure of it, and she is setting out on her own adventure. She is in control of so many situations in this movie.
Yeah, when she's a kid and she's like, oh, I think it'd be rather fascinating to meet a pirate. Actually, it's pretty hilarious. The governor's reaction, it feels like throughout most of the movie, he's just like, oh, please don't. Please,
right.
Please don't be into that kind of stuff. I bought you a dress. Please wear it. And then, of course, that dress ends up suffocating her and she has to take it off.
What else about Elizabeth, if anything, do you have to say?
You know, I know we're just talking about the first movie, but her transition throughout the films as it continues on is a thing that I admire as well. I mean, you know, that's something that I personally just pay attention to in movies. I really like strong female leads. It gets me real excited. I mean, I'm a female, so, you know. But it's not even just that she's a strong female. I think that a lot of times, like I said before, when you have like a strong extroverted lead character, it can be kind of irritating because sometimes it's a habit for people to make them kind of mean. And I just don't see that in her. Like, she's kind throughout the entire series. And there's even a point, I think, I don't know if it's this movie or Dead Man's Chest, but she's talking to Jack and she asks him, I think it's actually Dead Man's Chest. She's like, what do you think it would be like if you were a good guy? And in a way, she's really, you know, she's smart and she's manipulating him. But there's also just that touch of anybody can be good. And I love that in a character. I mean, that's just such a classic fairy tale trope, but it's great every time. I'm into it.
She and Will both are so dedicated to doing the right thing.
Yeah, Will. Oh, Will. I love him too.
Speaking of Will, let's talk about Will just a little bit. So what do you have to say about Orlando Bloom's Will?
I think he's he's hilarious. Like, you know, back to that scene where like he and Jack are talking about saving Elizabeth and he's just like, I'd die for her. He's like dedicated to the point to where it's like kind of funny and he's a little bit of a goof, but it's just the right amount, you know, like he's a genuinely loves her. And what I like about this movie is that, like, even though it's kind of like a love at first sight fantasy trope, as they go on throughout the adventure, they for real fall in love. You know what I mean? Like, because you could see, like, at the beginning, it's like, oh, really? Like, you think that she's pretty, sure, but you guys never talk. Like, you've known each other since you're 11, but you don't hang out. Like, how could you really love this person? But as they go on and, like, he saves her and they get to know each other more, it becomes really, really genuine. And I really like that element of the story. But Will himself, he's just a genuine, like, golden boy. He's a Prince Charming. But, like, it's real. It comes from within. And it shows with, like, how he deals with that torment when Jack is like, hey, your dad's a pirate. Hate to break it to you, but that's the way it is. And, you watch him go through it because he is one of those guys, like you said, that just thinks that pirates are scummy and dark. And he's like, no way that's in my blood. And then, sure enough, he uses it to his advantage. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, he's introduced at the start of the film as a gifted but unappreciated craftsman, and he's also sort of naive and even a little bit clumsy. He goes into these situations expecting one thing when the reality is completely opposite. He decides to fight Jack to prevent him from escaping, but he expected it to be an honorable sword fight. And at the end, Jack throws the dirt in his face. He says, oh, you cheated. And it's just funny that he has that naivety to him where he goes into
little heartbreak.
Right. He goes into these situations expecting one thing and just gets something completely different. Or like when he has helped Jack to escape from the prison on Port Royal and they are taking over the Dauntless so then they can get onto the Interceptor. Jack says, we're taking control of the ship, and he goes, oi, avast, or whatever. He like this standard stereotypical pirate slang, because he only knows the stereotypes, and that's something that he has to learn over the course of the film, is what does being a pirate actually mean? And he learns that through Jack.
Yeah. That was a perfect moment of comedic relief too. Just, oi, avast! And he's like, please don't ever do it again, for the love of God.
Yeah, and it's great that Orlando Bloom got a chance to shine. This was one of his first film roles. I mean, he had been in the first two Lord of the Rings at this point, but Legolas, for a lot of those movies, just sort of stands to the side and gives us exposition.
Yeah.
So this was his chance to really stand out as a leading man and a character or a person who can carry a movie. And I think he does a great job with it in this film and the next two. And it's great that he gets the chance to show off his acting chops. And he really does have that great chemistry with Keira Knightley's character, where the first time we see them as adults, we can tell they've got sort of something going on between each other, but it takes the course of the film for them to really show and to prove their love for each other. He proves it the moment that he helps Jack escape after she has been kidnapped. And then she proves it later when she goes into the cave by herself to help prevent him dying. And at the end, when he finally confesses his love, then they're finally able to reciprocate and have a chance together. So it's like this back and forth to a certain extent.
Man, it's funny now to think like years later, it's like Orlando Bloom wasn't a thing. And now he's like totally a thing. I can't imagine what Jack Sparrow would have been like if they casted Hugh Jackman. I mean, they originally wrote the role for Hugh Jackman. They say, I don't know if it's true, but they say that like that's the reason they called him Jack Sparrow. It's kind of like a wink over to Hugh Jackman. But like Hugh Jackman wasn't famous enough back then. Like he was just an Australian dude. Like he was famous in his country, but he wasn't famous to the United States yet. But I'm just so glad that they went with Johnny Depp and Orlando Bloom. It ended up being really good.
Agreed. Well, let's talk about Johnny Depp and Jack just a little bit more. This was something completely different. And this was really what put Johnny Depp on the map, because he'd done like indie films before this one. And this was his first big role. So anything else to say about Jack Sparrow?
There's so much to say. Like and once again, this is what me and one of my friends, her name is Christine, this is what really got her into casting, because the process was just so interesting. They were looking for something totally different. They had written this character. They knew they wanted him to be cocky and, just a really brave, very brass pirate. But they had no idea that what they were going to get was like this almost drunk kind of character based off of like 80s rock stars, I think. And of course the irony that he claimed to base it off of Keith Richards, and then Keith Richards came back and played the Pirate King later on. But I just love that story. Like he came in, he saw the script, he was like, this is a little goofy, I'm just gonna run with it. And they loved it. And truthfully, the introduction of Jack Sparrow in those first few scenes is one of the greatest ever. I mean, I know I'm a huge fan of this movie, but hear me out. Like, this is really, it's like a great introduction to a character. You know, the first time you like really see him, he's on a ship. He's like riding past these pirate skeletons that have been hanged. He salutes them, and then you see him like his hair riding in the wind, and it looks like he's on top of his ship, and then you see the ship is sinking. It's like almost
right.
completely sunk.
He's got this big majestic musical theme going along with him.
Yeah, it's perfect. And then you'll never forget the day you almost caught Captain Jack Sparrow. I mean, it's fantastic. I don't know what else to say.
Well, you're right. He's got this cockiness about him, but he's also got this determination that he can basically accomplish anything he sets out on. He always has a solution for each scenario that he comes across. And what's funny about it is that even though he doesn't always know if it'll work, it's almost like it's always improvised. Every time you see him like hit this lever and grab the rope to launch him across the ship, you see, I have no idea if this is going to work or not, but I'm going to do it anyways. And I think that's referenced later in the series. In this movie, he says something about how these crazy thoughts sometimes intersect with the genius. So every time he has a crazy thought, he just acts on it in hopes that it's genius. And what's funny is most of the time it is.
You know, that's another thing that I'm so glad you said that. That's another thing I love about him. You can see like his genius throughout the craziness as he goes on. Like that beginning scene whenever he's in Will's shop and he looks around at what's going on, and like the donkey is sitting there and he sees like the hot coals, and like he takes that tool and sort of like makes the donkey, he kind of like burns the donkey into where it starts to run around and set off that contraption, and he sees that that's the way to like break the chains that are holding him captive. It's like, who would have thought of that. Like and it's because he's a pirate. Like he has this experience that people look down upon, but it's made him really creative. And I love that that's like kind of a good juxtaposition between him and Will. He's always telling Will, like, please don't do something stupid for the love of God. But he's doing crazy shit all the time. But it's because he knows what he's doing. Like he has that skill to improvise.
That's a good point. They're like polar opposites. Will is very methodical and meticulous, and that's how he's such a good swordsman and craftsman when it comes to creating these works of art, like Norrington's sword. And Jack is impulsive, but a lot of his impulsiveness is led by intuition. And so over the course of the film, you see Jack sort of developing this meticulous plan, and that comes to a head at the end of the film when he's hinting towards Will that, you need to end the curse at the right time, at the opportune moment. And Will has to learn to act impulsively every once in a while. So they feed off of each other in a great way.
Yeah, it lends especially to the third act. You're right. It's when you see that arc finally come to a close, and Will is willing to get on that level with him.
And it's also fun to see, or to guess, what side Jack is playing for in this movie and in the sequels. You never really know.
Oh,
He's definitely in it for the self-interest of it all. He's in it for him, but along the way he has this sort of heart of gold aspect to his character where I'm going to do me, but along the way I'll do you and you as well, just because it benefits me in the long run. And he's a fun character. He's not an anti-hero per se. He's not a good guy or bad guy. He's just there and he's reacting, and along the way he does some good things, he does some bad things.
I was gonna say that too. It's for real. It's that great combination of just, yeah, he's in it for number one, but then he has that moment where he's just like, hey, can I really leave these people behind? Nah, I'm gonna go ahead and save them.
Now, what about Barbossa?
Oh, Barbossa. That's a great character. I think he has a little bit of that too. It's just it of course presents itself in a different way. Barbossa, I do think, is more out for number one. He more stands out to me, of course, in the following movies, as he makes a comeback and as his story develops more. In this first one, though, I think he's really just a perfect villain. He's that speech that he gives to Elizabeth when he's a zombie and he's just like, I feel nothing. Like, I need to get this feeling back. I need to be human again. And I'm lost for words. You got to help me out here.
Well, I think aside from Johnny Depp's Jack Sparrow, Jeffrey Rush's Barbossa is like the perfect pirate character. If I picture a pirate in my head now, yeah, Barbossa's like the first figure I go to, because he's just this crazy pirate guy, and I don't question it at all. There's even these moments where he's just like chasing Elizabeth and he just screams, ah! And he does the same thing when he's fighting Jack Sparrow at the end of the film. Yeah. He just sort of like screams and makes these vague pirate sounds, I guess is the best way to describe them. And it just works. He fits into the role so well.
Oh, seriously. And I know this is kind of a sidestep, but like the costume and makeup, especially for him and just, everyone else, of course, but it's perfect. I remember watching behind the scenes when I was younger, and they have like these contact lenses that they would give some of the pirates, and they would like make the whites of your eyes yellow. And I just remember seeing him put it in, and it's like as soon as he put those in his eyes, he just transformed into this crazy ass character. And I was like, this is perfect. Oh, just this grotesque, like compelling, real villainous, but at the same time, just a freaking goof. They're just out to sail the seas. That's why, like, you admire it when you're a kid. You're just like, I just want to go crazy and have adventure. And it's like, you don't realize that there's real darkness in these characters. Like, they're probably killing people wherever they go. Let's be honest.
Now that I think of it, I think this is the first film I ever saw Jeffrey Rush in, and it definitely made an impression. He's a fantastic actor, but this is sort of the role that I always associate him with. And what's funny is he's not a good guy or like a good dude at all in this movie. There's lots of people who get killed in this movie, more so than in the sequels, I think. But what's funny is that he still manages to be somewhat sympathetic in my eyes. There's the ending scene in particular, right when Jack has shot him in the heart and Will has ended the curse, and he goes, I feel. And there's this moment of relief where, wow, for the first time in years, I feel. And then he says, cold. and then he
Yeah.
dies. And that's so sad. That makes me tear up every time I watch it. I was doing some music research a couple of days ago for something semi-related that I'll mention later. And I just watched that scene on YouTube, and it made me tear up then, just isolated on its own. It's just, Jeffrey Rush is so powerful, and that scene makes him sympathetic. And there's an earlier scene, the scene you were talking about, where Elizabeth is eating dinner with him on the Black Pearl, and he's just like enviously watching her eat and getting almost like a pleasure from imagining doing the same.
Exactly.
And you feel for him a little bit. I can imagine going 8 years, 10 years, or I can't imagine actually going that long without drinking something or being thirsty and not being able to slake it.
I can't even imagine a day. I go nuts if I don't have lunch. This guy's going for 10 years. And he even says, he's like, I've never felt the touch of a woman's flesh. It's like, man. And a lot of times, you know what I really like about this too, is that that's the way that they do it. A lot of times movies do it with like flashbacks. They give you like the backstory of these villains, and that's the way that they gain sympathy for you. You know, you're like, oh, they had a hard childhood. But in this movie, I feel like they do it along the way, and they do it in a smart way to where like you just see his motivations and you have just the right amount of sympathy, but not too much, you know?
He's a character missing out on basic humanity. I mean, that's tough to imagine.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, if we wanted to talk briefly about these other characters, I had Gibbs written down.
Oh, Gibbs.
I had a question about Gibbs. You know, he's in that opening prologue, and he's with Norrington and the governor, and he's like part of the Royal Navy or whatever their title is. And he's just as suspicious as a pirate would be. He's exhibiting those behaviors early on, but then the next time we see him, he's sleeping with pigs in Tortuga, and he and Jack are best friends. So it just makes me wonder sort of what happened in his life to get him from point A to point B.
Yeah, well, he's a perfect example. You know, back in the day, pirates, the way they typically became pirates is that they were merchant sailors, just like Will Turner was saying his dad was. He was like, no, he was a merchant sailor. But a lot of times it just wasn't enough. And they found out that they can make more money or, you know, this benefit or that benefit by becoming a pirate. And I think that that's probably just what happened to Mr. Gibbs. Like he found his crew, honestly. He found the right people. I mean, I love Mr. Gibbs. Like he's another thing though, and I know this is kind of a sidestep, but he was like one of the original characters on the ride at Disneyland, and he's sleeping with the pigs. That's like his form, and he's still there. And they built him in Orlando as well. It's funny to, yeah, you're right, see that character go from working underneath Commodore Norton to be he seems desperate, but I just get the sense that he chose that life. Like it was the pirate's life for him, so to speak. From day one, he was always meant to do that. But what I love about Mr. Gibbs though is that it's funny because he seems like the type also that is like thrilled about the pirate life. He's down. He's always like, "Aye, matey." Like he says the stereotypical things. He's that one character that gives you like that satisfaction where he's like, in the second movie, how he starts off with like singing those pirate songs. It's just, yeah. He's the stereotype relief for me.
And he's such a great first mate and friend to Jack, and he basically follows him blindly. I just love that he's always there for him.
You know, for Captain Hook, he's totally a Smee. Like he's the right-hand man. Oh, I never thought about that until just now.
Yeah, and it says something about Mr. Gibbs' character that he's still around in the Pirates films. You know, he's one of the 3 characters that we've had in all 5 films up to this point. So that's pretty cool.
It's true. That is pretty cool.
Now, what about Norrington?
Oh, Commodore Norrington. Oh, man, I got a lot of feelings about that guy. I feel bad for him, but, like, at the same time, he's kind of like, yeah, I got a lot of feelings. It's also one of those things where I think of movies kind of in sort of a socio-critical way, like, or societal, rather. He's, like, way older than Elizabeth.
I noticed that this viewing, too.
Like, he was there when she was a kid. She was like 10 years old. And I know that was just a part of the times. But, you know, it's one of those things where you always know, like, this guy's not right for her. He's way too old. He can't relate. He's very, he's on the straight and narrow 100%. And it's like, it's different than Will in that, I don't know, he has more power. Maybe that's the difference, is that like Will is this lowly kind of lower on the chain in society. And Commodore Norrington just has like all this power, and he keeps getting exalted and he keeps getting praised. And sure, he's a good guy, but at the end of the day, he doesn't have this empathy that I'm searching for. Like, he doesn't have this being able to see into the eyes of even a pirate, which is something that Will and Elizabeth both have. And Will hates pirates, and he could still manage to work with Jack. Like, Commodore Norrington, it takes him forever to get to that level, and he only does it when he absolutely has to, which I don't even think is in the first movie. In the first movie, he had to have his heart broken before he even was sympathetic. Like, it was that part at the end where Elizabeth declares her love for Will, and that's like the only part where you see like his heart break, and he's like, fine, I'll give you a head start.
Right. Well, I do think in that just a couple minutes earlier to that, when Jack was getting ready to be hung from the gallows and they were reading off all of his crimes or whatever, I think Norrington was a little bit hesitant. He's like, yeah, he's a pirate, but he did save Elizabeth. He did get rid of Barbossa and this devilish crew. But you're right, it does take him a lot longer than it does the other characters to get to that point. He's this good man who's bound to the law, and he's more interested in following the law than maybe what the right thing to do is. And so you're right, when the opportunity comes around, he does take the advantage of the opportunity to sort of look the other way while Jack escapes, but he doesn't really do it of his own free will. But I do think he has a talent to sort of see people for who they are by the end of the film. He lets Jack escape because, maybe he's a pirate, but yeah, he's also a good guy. He lets Will stay free because Elizabeth sees something in him and I see something in him. He's a gifted craftsman. He's somebody who's dedicated and passionate in his work. And so I like him for that. And then when Elizabeth confesses her love for Will instead of him, he says, okay, I understand. And he doesn't really fight it. He's a good guy, and he sees people as they are, I think.
That's something that I think has changed as I've become older, is now I sort of see all of that in him. I remember when I was younger, he just irritated the shit out of me. And now I'm just like, oh, I feel more sorry for him than anything when I watch the film. And yeah, you're right. At the end, his arc kind of comes to a close in a really nice way, in a way we all would have predicted, but yeah, most of the time he's just that character that I'm like, come on, man, come on. Like, just come on, give him a break. He's very, like you said, bound to the law. But yeah, as I've gotten older, you can see that empathy within him, and he's a good guy. I just wish that he would just get on that level a little sooner, but then we wouldn't have drama, which makes a movie.
Right. And he does get more sympathetic in the sequels, I think, when basically all of his titles and everything are stripped away from him.
Yeah, I remember that part in Dead Man's Chest. You see him without his wig for the first time. It's like, what happened? What happened to you?
The last character I really have anything to say about is the governor, Governor Swan. And he gets his own piece of action with this dismembered hand at the end fight, and he's wrestling with that. And what I love most about that is after he's locked in the drawer and everything quiets down, he goes out and he joins the celebration like he did anything significant.
Yeah.
But my favorite scene with him is before Elizabeth climbs out of the window of the Dauntless to go rescue Will, essentially, and he's trying to have a conversation with her through the door. She has accepted the Commodore's proposal at this point in order to entice him to follow Will and help to rescue him. And he says, I'm proud of you for making this decision, but sometimes even a good decision can be the wrong one if made for the wrong reasons. He wants his daughter to be happy in that moment. I think that is the best part of that character in this movie is, yes, it would be a fantastic thing for his daughter to be married to this Commodore, but would she be happy? He doesn't know. And so he wants to make sure that she's happy first. And that is awesome.
I know. I'm so glad you brought that up. That is like the sweetest, especially, throughout the whole movie, like, where is the mom? It's one of those Disney things. There's always a mom or dad missing. Always. But, but like, it's so brilliant. I love multiple things about him. The fact that like he's I love that they take this like supposedly powerful leader that he is and kind of making him into a little bit of a goof.
And he's almost like the Sultan from Aladdin to a certain extent.
Yes, like it's like you can't you can't like super take him seriously, but at the same time, like he's lovable. He has good intentions. And yeah, I think if it weren't for that part, it really sells it for me. Where he, at the end of the day, he wants her to be happy. He could have so easily been like, I'm proud of you. You've done a good choice," which he was doing the rest of the movie. But finally, when she does make that decision, he's like, "Wait, hang on. I know you. You're my kid." And yeah, that's just such a sweet moment for me. I also just love when characters of power are sort of treated that way. I don't know why. I think it's just because a lot of times you see this like poor versus rich, and there's this assumption of like great bureaucratic control, and then when you see it just with this guy that's just kind of going along and like delegating, it adds another element of fun. It's like Jack Sparrow's character.
Right. And then in the last moments of the character with Will and Elizabeth, they finally reciprocated their love, and he says, "Are you sure this is the right decision? You know, he is a blacksmith after all." She goes, "No, he's a pirate." And he doesn't reject it. He's like, okay, I'll give this to you. And he's accepting of his daughter and her choices in the end of the film. So he is a good father in the end.
Yeah. That part is pretty hilarious. Like if you zoom out and look at the whole thing, it's like, oh my God. My daughter loves a pirate. Yeah, took that one really well, Dad.
And then the only other characters I really wanted to mention, you might have a couple more, but you have the two duos. There's Pintel and Rigetti, played by Lee Ehrenberg and Mackenzie Crook, the pirate with the wooden eye and the Hello Poppet guy. And then there's Murtaugh, played by Giles New, and Mulroy, played by Angus Barnett, who are the two British officers who originally stand up to Jack as he's approaching the Dauntless. And it's those two duos, and there's the additional comic relief aside from Jack, and they both have scenes where they stand out, and I think they both return in future films to continue the hilarity. I just wanted to give them a shout out because they're funny characters.
Oh yeah, buddy. And I'm so glad you brought that up. That is another product of great casting. Those separately, their dynamics are just fantastic. You know, the pirates, I mean, the wooden eye is also a great comic relief, but just the characters themselves, yeah, they bring a really great element to the whole thing. You always have those pirates on board, you know, everybody else is really serious and scary, and then you just have these two dudes. It kind of feels like they're just along for the ride in a way. Like his eyeball keeps popping out, the other one he just can't, they just can't catch a break. That part where they go up to her and they're like, "Oh, you could dine with the captain, or you could dine with us, and you'll be naked." And she's like, "I'm gonna go with the captain."
Right.
Thanks.
And he goes, "Fine."
Yeah, fine. Damn it. Yeah, they're great. And oh yeah, you're right. Whenever Jack is, so he goes up to them, and then they have that conversation, and then they just end up going off onto their own tangent and like talking about like, "You've never seen the Black Pearl?" "Yes, I have." "No, you have not." "Have you seen? Describe it." You know? Yeah, that's great. Those are great characters.
Any other characters you want to mention or shout out, or are we ready to move on?
I just think the whole thing is the casting was just well planned, even down to just the background, you know, characters. You know, there's this one. Oh man, I really wish I could remember his name, but he doesn't really have a name in the movie. He's just one of the pirates under Barbossa. He has this moment where he really brings you into their situation, and he says, "You know nothing of hell."
Oh yeah, I think that's they're storming Port Royal because Elizabeth fell in the water and the medallion calls out, and they go down into Jack's cell because he's been captured and is in the cell, and Jack is confronting, they're having this confrontation, first time they've seen each other, and he says that line to Jack specifically, "You know nothing of hell," and that's when he grabs him by the neck and the moonlight shines. Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, that's a good part. I'm really into that part. But really, it's like he's a really good actor too. I mean, I know that's like his one kind of claim to fame in that whole movie, but like you can feel the sincerity where he's like, "I've been dealing with this shit." Oh God, that was such a great introduction to the supernatural element of the film. I didn't even think about that, but that's like that's like the first moment,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, that's the first time you know something's up, and Jack says, "Oh, well, that's interesting."
Very interesting. Yeah, man, just the whole thing, it's really great. And was her name Anna Maria?
Yeah, the early Zoe Saldana role.
Yes, 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 yes. Zoe Saldana. Oh, I love her. Yeah, she's a great character too. They had a lot of fun with her, and that's where they see Will kind of taking a stand for the first time. Where he points to the ship and he's like, "Oh, we'll make a deal with you. We'll give you that ship." And then Jack is like, "What? Wait, we're gonna give her? No, this is our ship." And he's like, "Nope, we're gonna do it." Yeah, she's a great character too. That's another really like strong kind of almost irritating but not quite character. Real extrovert, really likes to take the reins and then in the end becomes extremely useful.
Yeah, I mean, there's all these bit parts in the crew that don't necessarily have big speaking parts or these big scenes, but there's the guy in Barbossa's crew with the bombs that we see at the very beginning when they're storming Port Royal, and then here we see him in the end fight, and Will and Elizabeth trick him by putting the bomb in his skeleton and then pushing him out of the moonlight. So
Oh,
we see that character
yes.
occurring throughout the film. We see the character you were talking about who says, "You know nothing of hell." Then there's the guy with like the subdermal piercings or whatever all over his face and his neck and
Oh,
stuff,
yeah.
who's like
Yeah.
I think it's Barbossa's first mate. So you have these characters with these really strong identities, even though they may not even be named characters. And then you have Jack's crew, which is just this whole bunch of misfits, which is fantastic. You've got Cotton, whose tongue has been cut out, and his parrot says this nonsense that they translate into whatever they think is appropriate for the situation.
Yeah, they had a lot of fun with that. I really love that in movies, even outside of like a technical perspective, just as a consumer. It's so much fun to see them having fun, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like they didn't have to add any of that, but it just really adds to the world and it adds to the feeling of all that's going on and just the fun. It's just a lot of fun.
Cool. Well, now let's talk about the music. So what do you have to say about the music here?
Chad.
I'm
Chad.
assuming that means you like it. Yes.
Oh, I'm so into it. Klaus Badelt, honestly, and I know this is really bold, but I remember being a kid thinking that it was John Williams, and I was wrong. Like, it's iconic. It
It
really is.
is.
Like, Klaus, he managed to just build this. You know it. As soon as you hear it, you know it. It's the cellos. And you know what? As a kid, I'm a cellist, and I started playing cello since I was younger. So this is also a really personal thing. But I
That's
remember,
really cool.
thank you. I remember hearing the whole thing and just immediately being obsessed. I mean, there's so many fantastic cello parts in this score for all of the movies, down to that, the da-da-da-da-da-da. That's a cello solo. It's a great use of the instrument and just of the feeling as a whole. It brings in this the century and also the fun of Jack Sparrow. I mean, most of it is like Jack Sparrow's theme. You know what I mean? Like you first hear that big overture whenever Jack is coming on his boat, right? Where like you find out that the boat is sinking. His introduction of the character. That's when you first hear that big score kind of introduced, and it's super powerful, and it makes all the fight scenes not just intense but fun. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I'm a horn player, so you can imagine how I feel through a lot of the score as well.
Yes.
And just some trivia on the score itself. Zimmer was originally, well, actually, Alan Silvestri was originally called to score the film, but nothing was ever recorded before. There were disagreements creatively. And so Hans Zimmer was asked, but Hans Zimmer was scoring The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise. And so he said, "Hey, my boy Klaus will be over here and he'll compose the score for you." But then Zimmer ended up writing most of the themes themselves himself. So even though Klaus Badelt is the composer in charge and his name's on the soundtrack album, Hans Zimmer was very involved. He did produce the album, I believe. And then his whole team, Ramin Djawadi, James Dooley, Nick Glennie Smith, I'm reading names, I don't know these by memory, Steve Jablonsky, Blake Neely, James McKee Smith, and Jeff Zanelli. All these people collaborated in making this score. And Jeff Zanelli is notable because he's the guy who just composed a score for Dead Man Tell No Tales. And Zimmer, of course, composed the scores officially for 2 through 4. So it's this big collaborative effort, as most of Zimmer's scores are, even though Badelt's name is on the album.
You're correct. I should have mentioned that. I mean, it's when you listen to it, it's true. It feels like it's kind of obviously a Zimmer sort of inspired piece. But all those other names, though, I really didn't. I didn't know. I mean, you'd think that a lot of them are collaborative, but yeah, all I really know is it was Klaus and Zimmer on there. But it goes to show you, it takes a handful of people to create something. I think it's. I don't know. If it's just me, I think it's brilliant. I mean, what do you think? I think it's really fantastic. It's so iconic. It's just unique, and I don't know. It's crazy, man.
And there's so much that is established in this first film. There's the pirate zombie theme that we first hear when we see Will in the ocean and they're approaching the flaming ship. And there's the he's a pirate theme, or the romance theme, that the first time we hear it is when Will and Elizabeth are first on screen together as adults. And you hear this romantic version of the theme playing in the background. And of course, that builds into one of the main themes for the whole series. And you hear it in its full glory in the end credits. It's the track He's a Pirate on the album. And you've got Jack Theme 1, which is his first appearance as he's sailing in on the sinking ship. And you've got Jack Theme 2, where he's trying to escape his handcuffs. And you've got another theme coming in when him and Will are fighting in the blacksmith shop. And there's just all these iconic themes that are introduced in this first film and developed throughout the rest of the series. And it's just amazing how influential the score is and how much it stands out in our culture. I think you could take this music and play just about any track, and if somebody is even just vaguely familiar with the series, they're going to be able to identify it as Pirates of the Caribbean. And I just think that's awesome. I used to give Zimmer a lot of flack because a lot of his music sounded the same, but at least it all sounded like Pirates because Pirates is awesome. So I don't give him too much flack for that anymore.
No, I'm the same, and you're right. You know what? Like, even like haters of Pirates of the Caribbean. One of my another one of my good friends, Natalie. She's not a huge fan of the series, but even she and I were having a discussion. It's like the music is so recognizable, and it really is good. Like, it's just catchy. They've done something really great. It's brilliant. Hans Zimmer, I'm the same. I used to kind of be I was a hater, but you know what? One of my good friends, I'm going to send you the video. One of my good friends, Morgan, well, she's more of an acquaintance, but she's great. She's kind of a media analysis studies sort of major, and she did this sort of walkthrough of Hans Zimmer and his recent works, and it's not as similar as you think. Like, Hans Zimmer is he thinks about the characters when he's writing these scores. You know what I mean? But no, you're right. I used to give him a lot of flack, but I just wanted to say, like, recently I've been thinking about it, and also Morgan, my friend, helped me come to the realization that, yeah, it's a lot more than you would think. He puts a lot of thought into these scores. But also, when you're doing scores for like really huge Hollywood sort of films, you don't have a whole lot of freedom. I mean, these directors kind of know what they want already. They have it in mind, especially when they're doing like an action movie. That's why like a lot of the action movies sound the same. It's kind of hard to get creative and do a character's theme, like Jack Sparrow's theme, when the director already knows what he wants. I don't know. I don't know what that's like, but I can imagine it's really difficult to work with a big studio with stuff like that.
Yeah, I've definitely come around on Zimmer in the past few years because I think especially now he is the most innovative composer out there. He's always trying new things and pushing the envelope, and just really pushing the boundaries of what people have done when scoring a film before. And he was definitely doing it before, but he wasn't doing that as much with the Pirates films. But with the Pirates films, he knew how to score a film so that people would love the music. I mean, people know the music, people love the music, and he is definitely just a very successful, popular composer, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What did you say you played again?
French horn.
French horn. Oh, cool. Did you play that in college as well?
I did. My major is music education.
Wait, I knew that. Man, so you probably know a lot about this stuff, huh?
Yes, I collect a lot of film scores. I have probably 200 film scores at this point. I'm not entirely sure on that number, but I have a lot.
Wow, okay. We could have like a whole other conversation on that. Anyways, you continue.
Last thing in the music section, I just wanted to shout out to another podcast, Sideshow Sound Radio, whose hosts I have had on the show. Wendell Jones talked about Monty Python and the Holy Grail with me, and Will Dodson talked about Lincoln with me. And they are releasing in the very near future a score guide on this movie's score, where they will go track by track and talk about every single detail in the score. And I submitted a couple of things to them to put into the podcast as well. So if you're interested in the music and want to dive in a lot deeper than we did here, definitely look for that in the next few days, sideshowsoundtheater.com. So let's go ahead and start bringing this home into the relevance and the theme section. What do you take away from this movie?
What do I take away from it? I think, and this is kind of cheesy nerd hour, but I just feel like, I don't know, a fantasy and this sort of, it's like a far-fetched reality. I don't know. It's not really as taken seriously, I guess. And I think that this film is very much a part of that new age of fantasy in terms of fame. Like Lord of the Rings really brought it back, especially with like high fantasy. But I'm really proud that like this movie is totally a part of that movement. And a lot of what I write tends to be that kind of stuff. And like fantasy and sci-fi is considered kind of niche genres, but I don't really think it is. I think that it's more widespread than you'd think. It's really enjoyable to have characters that you can have empathy for them and they're living lives that are completely outside of anything you could ever experience. There's something so fantastic in that,
Yeah, there are characters that are experiencing humanity and experiencing life, and though their living circumstances are different than ours, that doesn't mean we can't identify with them and take away lessons that they're learning and apply them to our own lives. And that's what's so great about sci-fi and about fantasy and about these widely varied worlds that, like you said, we would never experience, but that doesn't mean the humanity is absent from them.
And just to bring it back really quick to characters like Elizabeth and Anna Maria. As a little girl, I grew up with a lot of Disney movies that I loved and adored, but it wasn't until recently where they really started to make the female characters kind of, I don't want to say like stronger, but just more active in their own narratives. And that's just, I can't even really begin to describe how enjoyable it is to watch. You don't think that when you're raised with this sort of narrative that we have in Hollywood, you don't really think about it very often, but when you're a little girl and you see that, it really resonates. So I was like, man, I do want adventure. I do want to take charge. It's really encouraging and it's a lot of fun. I don't know. It's very feminist.
Yeah, we were talking about Mad Max Fury Road last week and how great a character Furiosa is, but it's nice to hear from a woman how much a strong woman character actually means. So I'm glad you're on to talk about Elizabeth specifically and Anna Maria and these strong female characters who are a lot more active in their story and less passive than a lot of female characters of the past have been.
And it's one of those things where I love that Mad Max episode, by the way. I listened to that a couple days ago. Yeah, but no, it's true. Like, the thing is, I think it's a fear because it hasn't been done all too much in the past, of course. That's so natural. But it's just time to not be afraid of it so much. And I love when, like, strong women get together and they're like, oh, we're going to direct this movie. It's going to be by females, for females. But it's also great when you don't even have to think about it too much. Like, they made this movie and they wrote Elizabeth and they were just like, I don't even think they sat down and said, like, oh, she's going to be a strong female. They were just like, here's this dope character. She's going to do what she's got to do. She just so happens to be a woman and she's dealing with her circumstances and she's doing her shit. I just think that's so cool. Whenever that happens, it feels normalized. You know what I mean? Like it feels like this is a normal thing. And sure, it's hard for her. Yeah, she's expected to get married, but it doesn't really impede her story all too much. And in the end, she uses it to her advantage. That sort of stuff is, I gotta say, it's really exciting to watch as a woman.
That's awesome. Now, another sort of takeaway for me, there's this idea of what piracy means within the context of the film, right? Where most people in the world, including Will and Norrington and even Elizabeth to a certain extent, she's fascinated by the world, but she recognizes that piracy is an evil act reserved to the worst men in the world. And over the course of the film, they grow to learn that piracy is as good or as bad as the intentions behind it. And you look at Jack, a character like Jack, who's not a pirate to be a pirate, to pillage and to plunder and to kill and to rape and all this kind of stuff. He's a pirate to be his own boss, to have freedom to go wherever, whenever. And there's this moment at the end of the film when he's gotten back on the Black Pearl and he's now officially the captain of the Black Pearl once again. And he just has this moment where he's sort of like lovingly holding the helm. And wow, I'm here. This is where I belong. It's that moment for him, and it's an awesome moment, and that just shows what piracy means to him. It's not an evil act. It's an act of freedom, and I think that's really cool. There's the difference between Jack being a pirate and Barbossa being a pirate.
And when Commodore Norrington flips over his wrist and he sees that East India Trading Company tattoo, it shows that sort of that contrast between what life are you going to choose? Like, sure, this one has its consequences, but is it that much worse than having to follow these strict set of rules and not being paid all that much? And it's that classic case of government versus rebellion. It's a theme that comes up in many of the things we watch, especially nowadays with, I think, young adult fiction, like the Hunger Games and stuff like that. And even in like Skyrim, I was playing it recently, and you have like the Stormcloaks versus the Imperial Army, and it's like the Stormcloaks are kind of racist and like they have a bunch of bad things going on, but the Imperial Army is also just run by this all-powerful dictator. So what are you going to choose, Exactly.
And I've sort of written that down as the idea of being right by the law or the code when it comes to the pirates versus doing what's actually right, like what's morally right, the right thing to do rather than the law. You've got Will helping Jack to escape, and you've got Norrington allowing Jack a head start because he rescued Elizabeth and helped to defeat Barbossa. You've got Gibbs and the crew returning for Jack, despite the code. Just because the code says specifically those who fall behind get left behind doesn't mean they're going to leave a friend behind. And that's something they have to learn. But it's this idea, again, of doing the right thing versus doing what is necessarily the right thing by law or the code. And the governor has this amazing quote at the end of the film once Jack has fallen over the railing and is swimming back to the Black Pearl. And he says, perhaps on the rare occasion, pursuing the right course demands an act of piracy. The piracy itself can be the right course. And that sums it up.
I knew you were going to say that. Sums up the whole thing. No, you're absolutely right. I don't even know if I can add anything.
Any final thoughts on the movie as a whole?
It's funny. It's one of those things where when I was growing up, I wasn't super vocal about it. I was also a really shy kid, like I didn't even admit that I was obsessed with Harry Potter until like one of my friends did. And then I found out it was like a cultural phenomenon, and I felt okay with talking about it. With Pirates of the Caribbean, it's kind of the same thing. Like I haven't really felt super, I don't know what it is, but I haven't talked about it with too many people. Like I said, like one of my best friends, we just discovered like a couple weeks ago that this was both of our like inspirations into a creative future. And I don't know what it is. It's funny to think about it. It's just a fantastic movie. It's really well written. It's really just well developed. The way everything came together and the fact that they didn't expect that it was going to be a mass success just boggles my mind. And I think it is a great product of smart collaboration and real thought. It took them years to build this script into what they wanted it to be before they really went for it. Because you're right. The fact that theme park movies tended to tank made a difference. They were debating on whether or not this should be like a straight to DVD movie. That blows my mind.
That's insane.
And to like, I guess, cheesy piggyback off of that, it's an inspiration for me to talk more about the things that I love and to just be confident in being nerdy, because chances are if you love something that much, somebody else is going to love it too.
Exactly. And that's why I don't believe in like guilty pleasures. There's things you like and there's things you don't. You shouldn't feel guilty for liking anything. And so talking about the things we love is, again, one of the focuses of Cinescope. And I'm so glad that you were able to come on and talk about the thing you love with me.
I was thinking of talking about some shit like The Graduate, which is but I don't really want to talk about it that much because they forced me to talk about it in film school.
And Dustin Hoffman, who needs him.
We all know it's good. We don't need to talk about it. But yeah, it's guilty pleasures are not a thing. Pleasures are a thing. And I'm really stoked you had me on your podcast. Thank you so much.
I am glad to have you on as well. Thank you. And I think that is the end of the official 43rd episode of Cinescope. We did it.
We did it. Hey, we finally met.
We did. Contact for the show, facebook.com/Cinescope Podcast and at Cinescope Pod on Twitter. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes. And remember, if you rate and review on iTunes, or if you share the show on Facebook or on Twitter and tag us, you will be entered into the giveaway, where there will be 3 winners, 1 grand prize winner who will win 2 movies that we've talked about, and then 2 second and third place winners who will win 1 movie apiece that we've talked about. So make sure you do that. You have until episode 52, so you still got a good long while. And if you've got feedback or ideas, you can email me at thecinescopepodcast@gmail.com, and you can use that email to contact me regarding co-hosting. If you have a movie that you love, not a guilty pleasure, just something that you enjoy, that you want to talk about, let me know and we'll get you on. Sarah, where can people find you online? Find your stuff, find your work, find your voice, all that kind of stuff.
Well, still working on the website, but people can find me on Twitter at Sarah D. Parrish. It's pretty easy, and Parrish is spelled with 2 R's, and Sarah is spelled with an H. My website is, you know what? I'm not even going to put it because I'm working on it.
Okay. If you want Sarah, go to Twitter.
Yeah, just go to Twitter. Working on my future. It's fine. Don't even worry about it.
The best place to find me is at Chadadada on Twitter. That is CHADADADA. And on Facebook.com/Chad.Hopkins. And all the show notes, all the contact information can be found at the website, thecinescopepodcast.com. And that's all for this week. Thank you once again, Sarah. It's been awesome having you on.
Thank you, Chad. I'm so glad to have talked to you.
Me too. And thank you, everyone, for listening to episode 43. I'm Chad Hopkins. This was Cinescope, and we'll be back next week with episode 44. Have fun and celebrate movies.